In Portland's quiet suburban home, a granddaughter deliberately excluded from her grandfather's funeral was about to face her vengeful family. What started as a routine will reading took a shocking turn when they discovered Theodore Ashford's final betrayal. Zara Ashford-Rivera wasn't your typical black sheep. For 5 years, she had rebuilt her life after exposing family corruption, known for choosing truth over loyalty. When Theodore's will named her primary heir, she had no idea justice was finally being served. What began as family exile would become their complete destruction. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The coffee mug trembled in Zara's hands as she listened to the voice on the other end of the line. Professional, measured, cold as winter rain. Miss Ashford-Rivera, this is attorney Lydia Montgomery calling from Millbrook. I regret to inform you that your grandfather, Theodore Ashford, passed away yesterday evening. Zara's breath caught. The Portland morning, which had started with Diego humming in the kitchen and the familiar comfort of their small apartment, suddenly felt fragile. Everything solid seemed to shift beneath her feet. She swallowed hard, forcing words past the sudden tightness in her throat. How? Peacefully in his sleep, the heart, the doctor said. He was 89. Lydia's tone softened slightly, but remained distant. The funeral service will be held Thursday at 2 o'clock at St. Andrew's Cathedral in Millbrook. Thursday? That was tomorrow. Zara's mind raced as she calculated drive time, work arrangements, the logistics of grief she'd never been allowed to prepare for. Thank you for calling. I'll make arrangements to... Miss Ashford-Rivera? Lydia's interruption was gentle but firm. I should clarify. I'm calling as a courtesy. Your grandfather specifically requested that you be informed of his passing, but... A pause that stretched like a held breath. The family has made it clear that your presence at the funeral would be unwelcome. The words hit Zara like a physical blow. She sank into the kitchen chair, the one Diego had painted sunflower yellow during their first week in this apartment, back when they were still pretending the wounds from Millbrook had healed. Unwelcome, she repeated, tasting the bitterness of the word. I'm very sorry. I wanted you to know that this decision did not come from your grandfather. Theodore spoke of you often in his final months, with great fondness. Zara closed her eyes, and suddenly she was 7 years old again, sitting in Theodore's study while rain drummed against the windows. He'd been teaching her chess, his weathered hands guiding hers as she learned to see patterns, to think 3 moves ahead. Remember, Zara, his voice warm with affection, the most powerful piece on the board isn't always the most obvious one. Sometimes the quiet ones change everything. Zara, Diego's voice pulled her back to the present. He stood in the kitchen doorway, concern creasing his features as he took in her expression. What is it? She looked at her husband, this man who'd stood by her through the worst period of her life, who'd helped her build something real and honest, away from the poisonous atmosphere of Millbrook. His dark eyes held the same steady warmth that had anchored her through sleepless nights and panic attacks when the family first turned against her. My grandfather died. The words felt strange in her mouth, too simple for the complexity of loss and rage and love all tangled together. Diego moved to her immediately, his arms encircling her as Lydia continued speaking. There are some additional matters we'll need to discuss, but perhaps after the service would be more appropriate. Your grandfather made some specific arrangements regarding your circumstances. What kind of arrangements? Zara managed, though Diego's presence made it easier to breathe. I think it would be better if we met in person. Would you be able to come to Millbrook in the next few days? After Thursday, of course. Zara almost laughed at the absurdity. After Thursday, after the funeral she wasn't invited to, after they laid Theodore to rest without the granddaughter who'd loved him most, before everything went wrong. I'll call you back. She ended the call before Lydia could respond. Diego's arms tightened around her. Tell me. And so she did. About Theodore's death, about the funeral exclusion, about the mysterious arrangements. As she spoke, she watched Diego's jaw tighten, the controlled anger of a man who'd witnessed the damage her family had inflicted. They can't keep you from saying goodbye, he quietly said. They can. They are. Zara pulled back to look at him. It's private property, private service. They've made their position clear. And what's your position? It was such a therapist question, gentle but probing, designed to make her examine her own feelings rather than simply react to others' actions. Even now, 5 years into their marriage, Diego couldn't entirely turn off his professional instincts when it came to helping her process trauma. I don't know. The admission felt like failure. Part of me wants to show up anyway, walk into that cathedral and dare them to throw me out in front of the whole town. And the other part? Zara stood, pacing to the window that overlooked their small garden. Diego had planted rose bushes there their first spring, saying every home needed something beautiful that grew slowly, with patience and care. Like healing, he said without saying it.
The other part knows that's what they want. Drama. Proof that I'm unstable, vindictive. That I'm the problem, not them. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass. Theodore wouldn't want his funeral turned into a battleground. The memory hit her with surprising force. Theodore's face the day everything fell apart. She'd come to him first, trembling with the evidence of Victor's embezzlement, expecting his support, his guidance. Instead, she'd watched something break in his eyes when he realized what his son had done, and what choosing to support her would cost the family's unity. "You have to understand," he'd said, his voice heavy with a weariness she'd never heard before. "This family, we've survived by presenting a united front, by keeping our problems private. But this isn't just a family problem, Grandpa. This is illegal. People's pensions, their retirements. I know what it is." He'd turned away from her then, looking out at the gardens his grandfather had planted, the legacy he'd spent his whole life protecting. "I just don't know if I'm strong enough to do it." In the end, he hadn't been. Not then. He'd asked her to stay quiet, to handle it within the family. When she'd refused, when she'd gone to the authorities anyway, he'd stood with his children in their united condemnation of her betrayal. But he'd never stopped calling. Brief conversations, awkward and painful, where he'd ask about her life, her work, her marriage. Conversations that stopped abruptly whenever another family member entered the room. Love rationed out in careful doses, measured against family loyalty. "He did love me," she said to the window, to Diego, to herself. "I know he did. The question is, what do you need to do to honor that love, and to honor yourself?" Zara thought about the woman she'd become in Portland, the social worker who fought for families torn apart by addiction, poverty, and systems that failed the vulnerable. The woman who'd learned that healing meant choosing yourself, even when love demanded sacrifice. "I'm not going to the funeral, but I am going to say goodbye, on my terms." Diego nodded, unsurprised. "What do you need from me?" "Help me plan a memorial, something private, something that honors who he really was, not the performance they'll put on." They spent the next hour planning. A simple ceremony in their garden, surrounded by Diego's rose bushes and the life they'd built together. Zara would read from the letters Theodore had written her over the years, the ones where his true feelings slipped through the careful family censorship. When Lydia called back later that afternoon, Zara was ready. "Ms. Montgomery, I won't be attending the funeral, but I would like to meet with you next week about those arrangements you mentioned. There's clearly something my grandfather wanted me to know." "Indeed there is." Lydia's voice carried something that might have been approval. "I think you'll find that Theodore was more aware of the family dynamics than anyone realized, and more prepared to address them." "What does that mean?" "It means, Ms. Ashford-Rivera, that your grandfather may have been saving his strength for something more important than a public fight, something that would ensure justice was finally served." The line went quiet, except for the sound of Zara's heart beating against her ribs. Justice. The word her family had taught her to fear, to see as betrayal rather than accountability. "I'll call you Monday to schedule a meeting." "I'll be waiting." "And Zara?" The use of her first name was deliberate, intimate. "Theodore was very proud of the woman you became. He wanted you to know that." After she hung up, Zara sat in the gathering dusk with Diego beside her, watching the rose bushes sway in the evening breeze. Whatever Theodore had planned, whatever these mysterious arrangements meant, she could feel something shifting in the careful distance she'd maintained from her past. The phone call had shattered more than just her quiet morning. It had cracked open a door she'd thought was permanently sealed, letting in light that was both terrifying and inevitable. Change was coming. She could feel it in the weight of Lydia's words, in the carefully hidden emotion behind the lawyer's professional facade. Whatever her grandfather had been planning in his final months, whatever strength he'd been saving, it was about to transform everything. She reached for Diego's hand, anchoring herself to the life they'd built, the love that had taught her she deserved better than crumbs of affection doled out conditionally. Tomorrow, her family would bury Theodore with all the pomp and circumstance that wealth could buy. But the real reckoning, that was still to come. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across St. Andrew's Cathedral as Zara pulled her rental car to the curb 3 blocks away. She'd driven through the night, unable to stay away despite her resolve. Now, wearing dark sunglasses and a black coat borrowed from a Portland thrift store, she moved through the crowd of mourners like a ghost returning to haunt her own exile. Victor's voice carried from the cathedral steps, rich with manufactured emotion. "My father was a pillar of this community, a man who understood that true strength comes from family unity." Zara's jaw clenched. Even at Theodore's funeral, Victor couldn't resist rewriting history. She positioned herself behind a marble angel statue in the cemetery adjacent to the cathedral, close enough to hear but hidden from the family's view.
Inside the cathedral, the service unfolded with orchestrated precision. Vivian had arranged everything. The white lilies, Theodore had loved daisies, the brass quartet, he'd preferred simple hymns, the guest list carefully curated to showcase the family's social standing, each element designed to project the image of a grieving but dignified family, united in their loss. From her hidden vantage point, Zara watched her mother through the stained glass windows. Isabel sat rigid in the front pew, her hands twisted in her lap. Even from this distance, Zara could see the tremor in her shoulders, the way she kept looking toward the back of the cathedral as if hoping for a familiar face that would never appear. Sebastian stumbled slightly as he walked to the lectern, whiskey already heavy on his breath despite the early hour. His eulogy began coherently enough, memories of fishing trips and business lessons, but deteriorated as emotion overwhelmed him. "He knew things," Sebastian said, his voice breaking, "about all of us. He saw everything, and he still loved us anyway." Victor's sharp look from the front pew could have cut glass. Near the cathedral side entrance, 25-year-old Celeste shifted uncomfortably. "Mom," she whispered to Vivian, "where's cousin Zara? Shouldn't she be here?" Vivian replied, "Your cousin made her choices." But her eyes scanned the crowd as if she, too, expected to see Zara's face among the mourners. The service concluded with Victor's final self-serving tribute. He spoke of legacy, of carrying forward Theodore's vision, of family bonds that could never be broken. Each word felt like a betrayal to Zara, who remembered Theodore's real values: honesty, integrity, and justice. As the congregation filed out, Lydia Montgomery appeared at Victor's elbow like a shadow materializing. Her presence commanded immediate attention despite her understated black suit. "The will reading is scheduled for tomorrow morning at 10. All beneficiaries are required to attend." Victor's confidence faltered slightly. "Beneficiaries? I assume you mean the family." Lydia's expression remained neutral. "All beneficiaries, Mr. Ashford. Your father was very specific about his final wishes." Something in her tone made Vivian step closer. "What exactly are you implying?" "I'm not implying anything. I'm simply following Theodore's explicit instructions." Lydia's gaze swept over the assembled family members. "I trust you'll all be prompt. Your father valued punctuality." As the family dispersed, unease rippling through their ranks like a stone dropped in still water, Zara remained hidden behind the marble angel. She watched them drive away in their expensive cars, their comfortable certainties already beginning to crack. Tomorrow would change everything. She could feel it in the weight of Lydia's words, in the lawyer's careful choice of language. Whatever her grandfather had planned, whatever strength he'd been gathering in his final months, the reckoning was about to begin. The next morning, Lydia Montgomery's law office hummed with tension as the Ashford family assembled around the mahogany conference table. Victor had arrived early, his expensive suit armor against uncertainty. Vivian swept in precisely on time, her silver hair arranged with military precision. Isabel followed quietly, dark circles under her eyes betraying a sleepless night. Sebastian slumped in his chair, nursing what was clearly his second cup of coffee, laced with something stronger. "Where's Celeste?" Vivian asked, checking her gold watch. "She'll be here," Victor replied, though his confidence seemed forced. Lydia entered carrying Theodore's will and a sealed box. Her presence commanded immediate attention. "Before we begin, I should inform you that I've asked Zara Ashford-Rivera to join us. She should arrive momentarily." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Absolutely not," Victor snapped, rising from his chair. "This is a private family matter." "She has no right to be here," Vivian added, her voice sharp as winter wind. Lydia's expression remained unchanged. "She has every right, as will become clear." Before anyone could respond, the office door opened. Zara walked in with quiet dignity, Diego beside her for moral support. She wore a simple black dress, her dark hair pulled back severely. She looked like she'd rather be anywhere else, but her spine was straight with hard-won courage. "Zara!" Isabel's voice broke on the name. Their eyes met across the table. 5 years of silence, guilt, and longing compressed into a single moment. Then Zara looked away, taking the chair Lydia indicated at the far end of the table, as physically distant from her family as possible. Victor's face had gone purple. "I won't sit here while she—" "You'll sit," Lydia said quietly, "or you'll forfeit any claim to your father's estate." The threat was delivered so calmly it took a moment to register. Victor slowly lowered himself back into his chair, his hands clenched into fists. Celeste arrived breathless, apologizing for her lateness. She stopped short when she saw Zara, confusion and something like relief flickering across her young face. Lydia opened the will with deliberate ceremony. Theodore Ashford was very specific about his final wishes. He spent considerable time ensuring this document reflected his true intentions. She began reading the standard legal language, but Zara barely heard it. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she felt her family's collective hatred radiating across the table. This was a mistake. She shouldn't have come. Then Lydia's voice cut through her spiral of doubt. "To my beloved granddaughter, Zara Ashford-Rivera, who showed me that integrity is worth any sacrifice, I leave the sum of $6 million, the family estate at Millbrook, and all contents thereof."
Furthermore, Lydia continued, her voice steady despite the chaos erupting around her, "I leave to Zara the responsibility of managing the Theodore Ashford Foundation, which will distribute the remaining $2 million according to her judgment." Victor exploded. "This is impossible. He was senile. She manipulated him." He turned on Zara with venom that made Diego shift protectively closer. "You poisoned him against his own family." "Victor, please," Isabel whispered. "No!" He slammed his hand on the table. "I'll contest this. We all will. A jury will see exactly what kind of person abandons her family and then swoops in like a vulture when—" "I suggest you listen to the rest," Lydia interrupted. The room fell silent again, though Victor's breathing remained ragged with rage. Theodore also prepared personal letters for each family member, along with additional materials that Zara will receive separately. Lydia's careful phrasing sent a chill through the air. He wanted everyone to understand his reasoning. Zara's hands trembled as the magnitude hit her. $8 million, the estate, the foundation. Theodore hadn't just remembered her, he'd chosen her as his primary heir, his moral successor. "This won't stand," Vivian said coldly. "We'll destroy you in court." But something in Lydia's expression, a flicker of knowing satisfaction, suggested that Theodore had anticipated this reaction, that whatever those additional materials contained, they would make contesting the will very unwise indeed. As the family filed out in furious silence, Zara remained seated, overwhelmed by the weight of her grandfather's final gift and the responsibility it carried. The reckoning Theodore had promised was just beginning. The wrought iron gates of the Ashford estate stood open for the first time in 5 years, waiting for Zara like a mouth frozen mid-scream. Zara gripped the steering wheel of their rental car as Diego navigated the winding driveway, past ancient oak trees that had witnessed 3 generations of family secrets. "You don't have to do this today," Diego said softly, studying her pale face. "The house will still be there tomorrow." But Zara shook her head. After the explosive will reading, after Victor's threats and Vivian's cold fury, she needed to claim this space before they could poison it further. "If I wait, I'll lose my nerve." The estate loomed before them, a Victorian mansion of weathered stone and climbing ivy, its windows reflecting the late afternoon sun like watchful eyes. Zara's chest tightened as memories crashed over her. Birthday parties on the wraparound porch, hide-and-seek games in the sprawling rooms, Theodore teaching her to tend his rose garden with patience and precision. Lydia's car was already parked near the front steps. The attorney emerged as they approached, carrying a leather satchel and an expression of grim satisfaction. "The house staff was dismissed yesterday," Lydia explained, handing Zara an ornate keyring. "Per Theodore's instructions. He wanted you to have privacy for what comes next." Inside, dust motes danced in shafts of golden light streaming through tall windows. Everything remained exactly as Zara remembered. The grandfather clock in the foyer, the oil portraits of stern-faced ancestors, the Persian rugs worn soft by generations of footsteps. "Theodore left specific instructions about these," Lydia said, retrieving a manila envelope from her satchel. 7 letters, to be opened in order. He spent months writing them. Zara's hands trembled as she accepted the envelope. Through the paper, she could feel the weight of her grandfather's final words, his carefully planned revelations. The first letter was brief, written in Theodore's familiar script. "My dearest Zara, if you're reading this, then justice has finally begun. I failed you 5 years ago when I chose family peace over truth. I was a coward, and that cowardice cost me the respect of the granddaughter I love most. I cannot undo those failures, but I can ensure that the truth you tried to tell is finally heard. The letters that follow will explain everything. Trust Lydia. Trust yourself. And remember, sometimes the most powerful piece on the chessboard is the one everyone underestimates." Zara's vision blurred as she read his words. In the margins, she noticed small notes in Theodore's hand, dates, times, references to conversations and events. This hadn't been a dying man's desperate attempt at redemption. This had been a calculated investigation. "There's more," Lydia said quietly. "Much more." A sound from the driveway made them all turn. Through the front window, they watched Victor's Mercedes tear up the gravel drive, coming to an abrupt stop. He slammed the car door with enough force to echo off the stone walls. "He doesn't have legal access anymore," Lydia murmured, but her hand moved instinctively to her phone. Victor's fist hammered against the front door. "Open this door, Zara. We need to talk." Diego stepped protectively closer to his wife. "He sounds unhinged."
Through the heavy oak door, Victor's voice carried a desperate edge Zara had never heard before. "I know you're in there. You can't hide behind lawyers forever. This family has stood for something in this town for over a century, and I won't let you destroy that." Zara looked at the letter in her hands, then at the 6 remaining envelopes Lydia held. Whatever Theodore had documented, whatever evidence he'd gathered, Victor was clearly terrified of it becoming public. "Let him in," she said quietly. Diego and Lydia both stared at her. "Zara," Diego began. "No." Her voice grew stronger. "I'm done hiding. If he wants to talk, we'll talk, but it will be on my terms, in my house." She moved toward the door,
her grandfather's words echoing in her mind. Sometimes the most powerful piece on the chessboard is the one everyone underestimates. Victor had spent 5 years believing she was broken, exiled, powerless. Time to show him how wrong he'd been. The heavy door swung open, and Zara faced her uncle's rage with the calm certainty of someone who finally held all the cards. Victor's rage filled the foyer like poison gas as Zara faced him across the threshold of what was now her home. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his silver hair disheveled, the polished facade cracking under pressure. "You manipulative little—" He caught himself, glancing at Diego and Lydia. "You think you've won something here. This house, this money, it should have been mine. I've given my life to this family while you ran away like a coward. The way I remember it, I was driven away for telling the truth." "Truth. You destroyed this family over some accounting discrepancies." "Embezzlement," Diego corrected quietly. "The word you're looking for is embezzlement." "You have no right to speak here," Victor snarled, stepping closer. "This is family business." "Then treat it like family business. Stop the threats, stop the manipulation, start telling the truth for once." Victor's eyes narrowed. "What has that lawyer been telling you? What lies has she been filling your head with?" Behind him, Lydia's expression remained carefully neutral, but Zara caught the slight tightening around her eyes. Whatever Theodore's letters contained, Victor was terrified of their contents. "Just go, Victor," Zara said, suddenly exhausted. "This doesn't have to be a war." "Doesn't it?" His voice dropped to something dangerous. "You've taken everything. The money I needed to rebuild after your betrayal, the house where my children should have played, the respect I've spent 5 years trying to earn back." He stepped closer, and Zara caught the smell of whiskey on his breath. "But you made one mistake, little girl. You came back to a small town where people remember loyalty, where your grandfather's money can't buy you friends." "Is that a threat?" Diego asked, his therapist's calm masking steel underneath. Victor's smile was cold. "It's a promise. This family has survived worse than one ungrateful child. We'll survive you too." After he left, tires screaming on gravel, Zara sank into Theodore's leather chair in the study. The remaining letters lay before her like unexploded bombs. Letter 2 revealed Victor's expanded schemes: kickbacks from contractors, falsified expense reports, a web of corruption that made the original embezzlement look like petty theft. Letter 3 documented Vivian's manipulation of the family's charitable foundation, diverting funds meant for homeless shelters into her society friends' pet projects. But Letter 4 made Zara's blood run cold. "My dearest Zara, your mother knew, not everything, but enough. When you first came to me with evidence of Victor's crimes, Isabel begged me to handle it quietly. Think of the family. Think of Celeste's future. She promised Victor would make restitution privately if we kept it within the family. I was weak enough to believe her. I was fool enough to choose their comfort over your courage." Zara's hands shook as she read Theodore's careful documentation of conversations, dates, witnesses. Isabel hadn't just stayed silent. She actively worked to cover up Victor's crimes, to pressure Theodore to abandon Zara. "How bad is it?" Diego asked softly. "Worse than I imagined." Zara looked up at him, this man who'd chosen to love her despite the chaos her family brought. He documented everything, every lie, every cover-up, every time they chose their reputation over doing what was right. Through the study window, she watched the sun set over the gardens Theodore had tended with such care. Somewhere in Millbrook, her family was gathering, planning their counterattack. Victor's threat echoed in her mind. This was a small town, and the Ashfords had deep roots here. But Theodore had given her something more powerful than money or property. He'd given her the truth, carefully documented and impossible to deny. The question was, what was she going to do with it? Letter 5 waited unopened on the desk, along with 2 more. Theodore's investigation was far from over, and neither was the reckoning he set in motion. Outside, darkness fell over Millbrook like a curtain dropping on the first act of a play. The real drama was just beginning. Letter 6 led Zara to Theodore's study wall, where his final clue waited. "Behind the portrait of my father lies the truth I couldn't speak in life." Diego helped her lift the heavy oil painting of Theodore's stern-faced father. Behind it, a section of oak paneling swung open on hidden hinges, revealing a wall safe that looked like it belonged in a bank vault. "He was more paranoid than I realized," Lydia murmured, though her tone carried approval. The combination was Zara's birthday, a detail that made her throat tight with emotion. Inside, neat stacks of documents weighted like sleeping bombs, financial records going back 15 years, photographs of Victor meeting with contractors who'd later been investigated for fraud, audio recordings on small digital devices, each labeled with dates and names. Zara's hands shook as she lifted the first recording device. Theodore's voice filled the study, tinny but clear. "This is a conversation between Victor Ashford and Joseph Martinez, recorded April 15th, 2023, in my home office." Victor's voice followed, casual and confident. "The homeless shelter project is perfect cover. We inflate the construction costs, kick back 30% to our friends, and nobody asks questions. Who's going to audit a charity?" Another voice, Martinez presumably. "What about your father? He's been asking more questions lately." "My father built this business by knowing when to look the other way. He'll come around." Zara stopped the recording, her stomach churning. While she'd been building a life in Portland, trying to heal from her family's rejection, Victor had been expanding his criminal enterprise. Using their grandfather's name, their family's reputation, their charitable foundation as cover for theft. "There's more," Diego said quietly, lifting a folder marked Vivienne Social Manipulation Campaign. Inside were emails between Vivienne and prominent Millbrook families, carefully orchestrated character assassinations disguised as concern. "I'm worried about Zara's mental state. Diego seems to be isolating her from family. Perhaps it's best if we don't include them in community events." Years of systematic exclusion designed to ensure that when Zara finally returned, she'd find no allies in Millbrook. But the worst was yet to come. The final folder contained a medical report from Theodore's doctor, dated 6 months before his death. Heart disease, yes, but manageable with medication. Followed by pharmaceutical records showing someone had been gradually replacing Theodore's heart medication with placebos. "Oh my God," Zara whispered. "They were killing him." "Slowly and carefully," Lydia agreed, her professional mask slipping to reveal cold fury, making it look natural while ensuring he wouldn't live long enough to act on what he'd discovered. Diego's face had gone ashen. "We need to call the police, the FBI. This is attempted murder." "Already done," Lydia said. "Theodore contacted federal authorities weeks before his death. Copies of everything here are already in their hands." Through the study window, car headlights swept across the driveway. Not Victor this time. Multiple vehicles, moving with coordinated precision. "Right on schedule," Lydia noted, checking her watch. "Schedule?" Zara asked. "The federal task force. Theodore arranged for them to move tonight, after you'd had time to understand the full scope of what you inherited." Lydia's smile was grimly satisfied. "Your family assumed they were fighting you for money, Zara. They never realized they were fighting a dead man who'd spent months building an airtight case against them." Outside, car doors slammed, official voices carried on the night air, sharp and authoritative. Zara sank into Theodore's chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of her grandfather's final gambit. He hadn't just left her an inheritance, he'd made her the executor of justice itself. The knock on the front door was firm and professional. "FBI, we have warrants." The reckoning Theodore had orchestrated was finally here. The FBI agents had been gone for 3 hours, taking boxes of evidence and leaving behind a house that felt lighter somehow, as if decades of secrets had been physically removed from its walls. Zara sat in Theodore's study. Letter 7 finally opened before her when the sound of multiple cars in the driveway announced her family's arrival. They came as a united front. Victor, Vivienne, Isabel, and Sebastian, their faces masks of barely controlled panic. Celeste trailed behind, confusion written in every line of her young face. "You called them," Victor said without preamble as Zara opened the front door. His earlier bluster had evaporated, replaced by something raw and more desperate. "You destroyed us." "I didn't call anyone," Zara replied calmly.
Theodore did, months ago. Vivian pushed past Victor, her usual elegance frayed at the edges. You have to fix this. Tell them it was all a misunderstanding, that the evidence was fabricated. Why would I lie to protect people who tried to kill my grandfather? The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Isabel's face crumpled and Sebastian swayed as if physically struck. That's ridiculous, Victor snarled, but his voice lacked conviction. He was old. His heart was fine until someone started replacing his medication with placebos. Zara's voice carried the authority of documented truth. Victor recorded everything, Victor, including your conversation about how he'd come around to your way of thinking. Celeste stepped forward, her young face pale with dawning horror. Dad? What is she talking about? She's lying, Victor desperately said. She's always been jealous, always wanted to tear this family apart. Stop. Sebastian's voice cut through his brother's protests. Just stop. He looked at Zara with eyes that held years of guilt and growing clarity. How long did he know? About the embezzlement? 5 years. About everything else, at least 2 years. And he never said anything. Sebastian's laugh was bitter. He just watched us destroy ourselves. Isabel finally found her voice, broken and small. Zara, please, you have to understand, we never meant for it to go this far. Victor said it was temporary, that he'd pay everything back. You knew they were killing him, Zara said quietly. The medication tampering started 6 months ago. You all knew Theodore was asking too many questions, getting too close to the truth. I didn't know about that, Isabel whispered. I swear, I didn't know. But you knew about everything else. Zara pulled out one of Theodore's letters, her mother's complicity laid out in painful detail. You convinced him to silence me 5 years ago. You chose Victor's reputation over your own daughter's integrity.
The words broke something in Isabel. She sank into one of the foyer chairs, tears streaming down her face. I thought I was protecting the family. I thought if we could just keep it quiet. You protected criminals, Diego said from behind Zara, his voice carrying clinical precision. And when your father started investigating, you helped them silence him permanently. Vivian's composure finally cracked. You self-righteous little... Do you have any idea what you've done? This family built this town. We employ half the people here. When this becomes public, when the business collapses, hundreds of families will suffer. Maybe they should have thought of that before committing felonies, Zara replied. We can still fix this, Victor said, desperation making his voice high and thin. The foundation money, we can pay it all back. The business accounts, we'll make full restitution. No one has to know. Everyone will know, Zara said simply. Theodore made sure of that. She held up the final letter, the one that had outlined Theodore's complete plan, the evidence packets already delivered to journalists, the whistleblower protection arrangements, the ironclad legal framework that made covering up impossible. He spent his last months ensuring that justice would be served no matter what happened to him, no matter what you did to me. The room fell silent except for Isabel's quiet sobbing. Celeste spoke into the stillness, her voice young but steady. I won't be part of this anymore. She looked at her father with something that might have been pity. I'm sorry, Dad, but Cousin Zara's right. Celeste, Victor started. No. She moved toward Zara, crossing invisible battle lines that had defined their family for years. I want to know the truth. All of it. Outside, sirens wailed in the distance, more law enforcement, more consequences approaching like a tide that couldn't be stopped. Theodore's final victory was complete. 3 days after the FBI raid, Millbrook buzzed with a tension that felt electric. The morning headlines of the Millbrook Gazette screamed, Ashford family scandal rocks town, in bold letters that seemed to vibrate with barely contained shock. By noon, news vans from 3 major networks had descended on the quiet town like locusts.
Zara watched the circus from Theodore's study window, Diego's steady presence beside her, as they observed their former neighbors clustering in small groups, voices hushed but urgent. Some faces showed sympathy. These were people who remembered the young woman who'd tried to do the right thing 5 years ago. Others were expressions of betrayal, as if Zara had personally destroyed their carefully ordered world. "Victor's been arrested," Lydia announced, entering with her phone still pressed to her ear. "Federal agents picked him up at his office an hour ago. Vivian has fled to her sister's house in Switzerland, but extradition papers are already being filed." Celeste sat curled in Theodore's leather chair, looking impossibly young as she processed the destruction of everything she'd believed about her family. "What about Mom and Uncle Sebastian?" "Isabel is cooperating fully with federal investigators," Lydia replied gently. "Her early assistance will likely result in reduced charges. Sebastian has checked himself into rehabilitation. His lawyer thinks the addiction issues will help with sentencing." The doorbell's chime interrupted them. Through the window, she saw a familiar figure on the front steps, Margaret Hendricks, who'd been her mother's closest friend before the family schism. The woman's face wore the careful expression of someone bearing difficult news. "Miss Hendricks," Zara said as she opened the door, surprised by how normal her voice sounded. "Zara, dear." Margaret's smile was strained but genuine. "I wanted to apologize for believing the lies, for turning my back on you when you needed support." Behind her, other figures approached, tentative, apologetic. Frank Morrison from the hardware store, Sarah Chen who'd taught Zara piano, Dr. Patricia Wells who delivered her 28 years ago. One by one, they came to offer support that was 5 years too late, but desperately needed now. "Your grandfather," Dr. Wells said quietly, "came to see me 2 months before he died, asked me to witness a document, a confession really, about how the family had pressured the town to ostracize you." Her eyes filled with tears. "He was trying to protect you, even then." By evening, the parade of visitors had finally ended. Zara found herself in the garden Theodore had loved, among roses that still bloomed despite their gardener's absence. Celeste joined her there, both women needing air after the suffocating weight of the day's revelations. "I keep thinking about Dad," Celeste said quietly. "All those times he told me you were unstable, selfish, that you'd betrayed the family. I actually believed him. I was so young when it happened and everyone just accepted his version. You couldn't have known. That was the point of their campaign, to make their lies the only truth anyone heard. But Theodore knew. He saw through it all." Celeste's voice carried a mixture of admiration and regret. "He must have felt so alone." Zara thought about those final letters, Theodore's careful documentation of his family's descent into corruption. "I think he found peace in knowing justice would finally be served, even if he couldn't live to see it." What happens now? To the business, the foundation, the family name?
The foundation will be restructured under federal oversight, Zara said. The business, honestly, it may not survive. Too much corruption, too much damage. She looked at her young cousin, this unexpected ally who represented hope for their family's future. But maybe that's not entirely bad. Maybe it's time to build something new, something clean. As darkness fell over Millbrook, Zara felt the weight of Theodore's legacy settling around her shoulders. Not just the money or property, but the responsibility to use his final gift wisely. Justice had been served, but healing would take much longer. The town's lights flickered to life below them, each window representing families whose lives had been touched by the Ashford scandal. Tomorrow would bring more consequences, more revelations, more difficult choices. But tonight, sitting in her grandfather's garden, with the cousin who'd chosen courage over comfort, Zara finally felt the possibility of redemption blooming in the darkness. 6 months later, autumn painted Millbrook in shades of gold and crimson that matched the hope slowly returning to the town. Zara stood in the conference room of what had once been Ashford Industries, watching as contractors installed the new sign, Theodore Ashford Community Foundation. The business empire that had defined her family for generations was gone, dissolved under federal oversight. But from its ashes, something cleaner was emerging. The foundation would focus on ethical business development,
supporting small entrepreneurs who'd been overlooked by the old power structures. The Henderson family's bakery application looks promising, Diego said, reviewing files at the conference table. He'd taken a leave of absence from his therapy practice in Portland to help with the foundation's launch, finding purpose in this different kind of healing work. Celeste looked up from her laptop, where she'd been designing the foundation's new website. At 25, she was discovering talents beyond the social butterfly role her father had prescribed. I've scheduled interviews with 3 more local businesses this week. The response has been incredible. The door opened and Isabel entered hesitantly. She'd aged years in the past months, her face showing the weight of cooperation with federal investigators and the slow work of making amends. Zara, I have those financial reports you requested. Their relationship remained fragile, trust broken too completely to heal quickly, but they were learning to work together. Isabel's intimate knowledge of the family's business practices had proven valuable in cleaning up the financial wreckage, and her willingness to testify against Victor had earned her a suspended sentence and community service. "How's Sebastian doing?" Zara asked, accepting the documents. "Better. 3 months sober now." Isabel's voice carried cautious pride. "He's been volunteering at the Addiction Recovery Center downtown, says he wants to help other people avoid his mistakes." Through the conference room windows, Zara could see the town square where a modest crowd was gathering for the foundation's first public meeting. Margaret Hendricks was setting up folding chairs, while Dr. Wells arranged informational displays. Frank Morrison stood talking animatedly with other business owners, his hardware store having been one of the first to receive foundation support. "I still can't believe how many people showed up to help," Celeste murmured, watching the scene below. "Millbrook's always been a good town," Isabel said quietly. "It just lost its way for a while. Got caught up in our family's lies." "Speaking of which," Lydia announced, entering with her characteristic directness, "Victor's plea hearing is scheduled for next week. His lawyers are recommending he accept the federal prosecutor's offer, 15 years with possibility of parole in 8. Zara felt the familiar tightness in her chest that Victor's name still triggered. "And Vivian?" "Extradition approved. She'll be back in the country within the month to face charges." Lydia's expression softened slightly. "How are you feeling about all this?" It was a question Zara had been asking herself daily. Justice was being served. The criminals were facing consequences. The stolen money was being returned to its rightful purposes. The community was healing. But the cost had been enormous. A family destroyed, a business empire collapsed, hundreds of employees displaced. "I think," Zara said slowly, "Theodore would be proud of what we're building. Not just the foundation, but..." He gestured toward the window, where Celeste was now heading downstairs to greet the arriving community members. The next generation making different choices. Diego moved to stand beside her, his hand finding hers. "Any regrets about staying in Millbrook permanently?" Zara considered the question. They'd sold their Portland apartment, committed fully to this new life in her hometown. It meant being surrounded by memories, some beautiful, others painful. But it also meant being present for the healing process. "No regrets," she said firmly. "This is where the work needs to be done." Below in the square, Sebastian arrived looking healthier than he had in years, his sobriety bringing clarity to features that had been clouded by addiction and guilt. He immediately moved to help set up chairs, his actions speaking louder than any apology could. As the crowd grew larger, Zara saw faces that represented Millbrook's future: young entrepreneurs, honest business owners, community leaders who'd chosen integrity over easy profit. They were the people Theodore's foundation would serve, the ones who would rebuild their town's economy on a foundation of ethics rather than corruption. "Ready?" Diego asked as it came time to head downstairs for the meeting.
Zara looked around the conference room that had once housed her family's criminal enterprise and now served as headquarters for legitimate community development. On the wall, Theodore's portrait watched over them. Not the formal oil painting from the estate, but a candid photograph of him in his garden, dirt on his hands and contentment in his eyes. "Ready," she said. The work of redemption was just beginning, but for the first time in 6 months, Zara felt genuinely hopeful about what they were building together. 1 year after Theodore's death, Zara stood beside his grave in Millbrook Cemetery holding a single white rose from his garden. The headstone was simple granite, bearing only his name, dates, and the words she'd chosen. He found courage in his final hour. The community center dedication had been a triumph. 300 people attended, including 12 businesses now thriving with foundation support. Sebastian, 10 months sober, had given a moving speech about second chances. Even Isabel had found her voice, speaking honestly about the importance of choosing courage over comfort. He would have loved seeing the town come together like this, Diego said softly, placing his hand on her shoulder. Celeste approached carrying a small potted rose bush. From his garden. I thought we could plant it here. As they worked together in the soft earth, Zara felt the weight of the past year settling into something manageable. Victor was serving his sentence. Vivian faced trial next month. The foundation was funding 37 local businesses. Most importantly, Millbrook was learning to value integrity over image. "Thank you, Grandpa," Zara whispered to the grave, "for trusting me with the truth." A gentle breeze stirred the newly planted rose, its leaves catching the afternoon sunlight like hope taking root. Theodore's legacy lived on, not in buildings or bank accounts, but in the courage he'd inspired others to find. Justice had become healing. Healing had become hope. The legacy was fulfilled. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.